guys, it's Tech Support here, and welcome to episode 2 of my Cybersecurity and Hacking web series. So today we're going to be focusing on attacks, specifically web-based attack vectors. So just a side note, these are some of the attack vectors, not all of them, and actually I'm going over so many that I'm actually going to split this up into 2 parts, so this will be the first part. Alright, let's get into it. So today we're going to learn about the different ways hackers can gain access to your favorite sites. So let's start with a really common one, the SQL injection. So SQL injections are performed by adding a single or double quotation mark in a username or password field. They work because if the code on the server side is written insecurely, these characters break the username or password string and pretty much allow you access to the whole SQL database. So let's see how it's done. So let's say I'm a hacker, right, and I'm presented with a user inputted field like this, where I'd enter my email or my password. So as we can see here, this is what the server code looks like, and it's a simple SQL statement, but they're just using single quotation marks as a string here. So now let's say as a hacker, I'm going to actually add another string, which will close it off like this, and then I can add any expression after it that is always true. So in this case, we're using 1 equals 1 and 1 always equals 1. So what I'm telling the computer is basically, if the password is correct, let me in, or if 1 equals 1, let me in. And 1 always equals 1, so pretty much I'm always being let in. Now, if this works, I have gained access and I can drop all the SQL tables so I can get pretty much every user on the site's password and email. So really not a good situation for the people who own the site. Luckily, because it's such an easy and common attack, most sites have this vulnerability patched, although we sometimes do see some disasters where they don't, but generally speaking, most sites are patched to this. Now, let's move on with cross-site scripting. This is what I call the notification hack, right? So cross-site scripting, or XSS attacks, are performed by writing JavaScript inside a user form field. They work because of insecurely formatted code, which allows the user to input JavaScript. So for example, let's say I'm on some social media site like this. In this case, it's something like Reddit, which is a funny thing. All right, so inside of this user inputted field, I'm going to put a scripts tag, right? So I'm actually going to do an alert. So in this case, I'm saying your croissants are limp and sad, right? Because it's a baking form. All right, so now on the other user's screen, this comes up, right? So what this means though, is this means that I can put JavaScript into the site. The site has not prevented me from doing that. So I'm going to say, okay, let me do something a little more malicious with my power. So in this case, I'm actually going to do a cookie hack, and I'm going to redirect them to a malicious site. So once the user screen is affected by this, right, their cookie has been stolen, and basically the other user's session has been hijacked. So I can type anything or do anything as the user on this, and also the victim screen has been redirected to a malicious site, which they can download all sorts of malware and things like that, which we went over in the last episode. Yeah, so it is, again, a common and easy attack, so almost all sites have this vulnerability patched, and that is a good thing. So most of the time this won't work, but if it does, you have a lot of access. All right, so let's go with command execution, or the secret message hack, right? So command execution is performed by writing commands in a user input field, and they work if input fields are not sanitized, and again, users can directly input commands into the shell. So in this case, the code shows that the domain field is not sanitized. So what, as a hacker, I can do is I can input a command into the user field. In this case, it's just an echo command just to see if it works, right? And now when I click inspect element or something like that, for example, in Chrome, you can control click and inspect element to see if this stuff works. The line has been inputted into the shell, which I see, aha, so that means that the whole thing is vulnerable. So now I'm going to put in something a little more malicious than just a print statement, right? So for example, I'm going to put in this thing, and this basically means show the password file, and that is really not good. So I get all the passwords to the server, right? This is the hashed password. Again, this is a quite common attack, so thankfully most websites have this vulnerability patched, although if they don't, pretty much I can log into the server and wreak havoc, so that's really not good. Alright, so this is clickjacking. This is the tempting hack. So clickjacking attacks are performed by creating a new URL that looks like a popular site and then adding a harmful link. They work if a site has not disabled their Z-frames and also through social engineering, right? So let's see how a user can be trapped into this. So this is a cute, benevolent site, right? Little kitty get revenge on a vacuum cleaner or something. It's perfect for a hacker to attack, right? So now as a hacker, I'm going to create a similar URL. So as we can see, it's not kittens.com, but we have some numbers thrown in there, but it looks identical, right? However, I'm going to put a malicious link in the Z frame, right? Which is going to redirect that user to another site, possibly steal some cookies, really not good things. And it leads to something like this. Thankfully, a lot of browsers prevent people from going on these sites with these kinds of warnings. Although if they're not prevented, a user's session can be hijacked and they can download malware. And this is a way that social engineering works. So the hackers get people who aren't very carefully looking at their links to click on this stuff, and the user can be hacked. And it is an often overlooked attack, so actually a medium amount of sites have this vulnerability patched, but also some don't. Because it's basically a replica of a site, so it's not necessarily attacking a specific site, but it's attacking the users who are on the site. Again, if you own a site, this is really not something you want to be vulnerable to because it can create a great distrust in your users. So yeah, it's good to protect yourself against this. All right, so let's go with cross-site request forgery, which is what I call the reproducing hack. So a cross-site request forgery, or CSRF attack, is performed by adding a malicious payload directly to the URL and then having a user click on a bad link. So they work if a site does not have any protected cookies and user sessions, and also through social engineering. So let's see how something like this would work. So as a hacker, I'm going to create a bad link, right? I'm going to have some sort of site, but I'm going to make this message equal some sort of payload. So I'm going to put some sort of code here, right? And I'm going to send it to someone. And it's going to be some tempting bait that the user should click on. And if the user does click on it, it'll lead to the bad link, which will cause the user to perform an unwanted action. So for example, in this case, it causes the user to post the same link on their social media site, spreading a worm. So this could mean that they can also download malware, steal their cookies, they can do more malicious things. But let's say in this case, another user clicks on it and the worm spreads. So now all of a sudden you have this large amount of malware on your site, which you really don't want. And it can be quite a disaster. So thankfully this is a common attack and most sites have this vulnerability patched, although if they don't, this can be quite a dangerous attack as shown in this example. So this is directory traversal, or the backtrack hack, right? Directory traversal attacks are performed by adding a file path to a URL to access sensitive server-side files. So they work if file names are not sanitized and if sensitive files are stored right alongside public ones. So let's see how it works. So here's a good URL, right? In this case, we're looking at, I think, a menu or something like that. It's a PDF. Okay. So instead of doing this, I'm a hacker and I'm going to see, okay, let me traverse these. So in order to go back a folder in general, you do .. right? So let's say I'm a hacker, so I'll try this on the URL. So I'm going to do .. right? And until I get this private key or like a password file or something like that. So in this case, the file names were not sanitized and a sensitive file is easily accessed. So instead of downloading the menu like I should have been, right, I'm actually going to download the private key, which can easily be decrypted using all sorts of softwares. And it's downloaded by this hacker. And this is really, really not good because it's a sensitive server file and pretty much I have access to all the server passwords, everything, so I can enter the server and I can pretty much wreak havoc on the site. Not a good situation. So again, thankfully this is a common attack and most sites do have this vulnerability patched. However, if they don't, it can be quite dangerous. All right, so this is the reflected cross-site scripting attack, right? Or the clever search hack. So they're performed by adding malicious JavaScript directly to the link of a site, usually in some sort of search parameter. And again, they work if the terms are not sanitized and they're often paired with social engineering. So let's see, this is a nice search URL, right? But instead of saying search equals taco or some good term like that, I'm actually going to put some JavaScript code in here. So in this case, it's a redirect, right? So the site successfully runs the malicious JavaScript code. In this case, it redirects to another site. So as a hacker, I'm like, yay, perfect. They're vulnerable to this attack. So now I'm going to send this to somebody as tempting bait, right? And if clicked, it will actually steal all the user's cookies, which means that I have access to this user's session and I can do anything pretending to be the user. And it will also redirect them to the hacked site where they can possibly download malware. And also, I have all of their cookies, so I can steal all their information, all their passwords, everything. It's really not good. But good news is that much like CSS, it's a common and easy attack, so almost all sites do have this vulnerability patched. So that is a good thing. All right, let's go to DOM-based XSS, or cross-site scripting. I call this the location attack. So DOM-based cross-site scripting attacks are performed by adding malicious code in a URI fragment. So the URI fragment is the part of the URL after that number sign or hashtag sign that usually signifies a user's location in the page, right? They work if the URI fragment is not sanitized and is again often paired with social engineering. So this is an example of a nice URI fragment. So that means I was scrolling down and I'm kind of on, let's say, the 5th image or something. You find these in a lot of sites, right? But in this case, this is the server-side code and it is unsanitized. So we don't want this, right? So now instead of putting number 5 or wherever I am in the site, I'm again going to put some JavaScript code. I'm going to make a user click on it. There's usually some base attached to it. Again, I get the cookies. It's pretty similar to the previous one, but yeah, this is again. However, the problem is with this one is it is a rarer attack, so less sites have this vulnerability patched, but it works very similar as a cross-site scripting attack. And this is, again, not a great situation for the site because you can steal all the user's data, etc. All right, so file upload vulnerabilities, or the uploaded hack, they're performed by uploading a hacked file to a server using a site's file upload system. They work if file names and extensions are not renamed and if file checking is all done in JavaScript, or better yet, not at all. So in this case, I'm going to change the image. Let's say I'm a hacker again. I'm changing the image for this, but instead of uploading a nice little image file, I'm going to upload a hack, right? So the hack is uploaded, and in this case, let's say they check the file using JavaScript. What I can do in my browser, I can just disable JavaScript to prevent the file checking. And in this case, it redirects me to a link, right? So the malicious link works, and this is really not good. So it means that it's vulnerable because the link works. So now let me do something a little bit more malicious, right? So I'm going to put a command in here, let's say. In this case, I'm going to redirect to some password file. So now, great, I input this whole thing, I upload this hacked file, and now it inputs the command to show the usernames and passwords of everybody. And this is, again, not really not good for the site. So this is a somewhat common attack, so a medium amount of sites have this vulnerability patched, but it's really important to do file checking not in JavaScript, and you also must be checking the files, otherwise things like this can happen. All right, so this is the broken access control, or the un-Google hack. Right, so broken access control hacks are performed by accessing a private part of a website, for example, unreleased content, by guessing or word listing pages. And they work if names of pages are easy to guess and if the site relies on obfuscating data rather than authentication. So for example, let me put a lucky URL in here. So this PDF, for example, was not supposed to be accessed until a certain date, but they uploaded it early so I can actually access this whole thing. And usually people don't do it because search engines like Google don't show it and the file is hidden from most users. However, if you make a lucky guess in the URL, you can access all these files that really aren't supposed to be accessed. But for example, now it's public and now they can release it, right? So because of this, they're generally an uncommon attack, but many sites do not rely on obscuring. So the good news is that many sites don't necessarily do this. But if sites rely on this, it can be quite dangerous if somebody guesses this URL or uses a word list or something. It's not good. All right, so let's go to open redirects, or the return key hack. So open redirect hacks are performed by sending spam using a benevolent site's URL and bypassing email's anti-phishing measures. They work if sites do not check their redirect links, so redirects can lead to any other site and also through social engineering. So here is an example of a bad URL, right? So it's a redirect link in this case, and spam email is sent using a reputable site not blocked by anti-phishing or anti-spam software used by email providers like Gmail, for example. So they click on this because it seems legit, right? So they log into the site and get redirected to the harmful link instead of the right one. And now this harmful site can steal the info, download malware, etc. And the user really gets tricked because of the reputable site, right? Because the email does not block this. The email thinks this is coming from a good site, right? So it's really not great for the person who owns this site. They're generally a common attack, so most sites do have this vulnerability patched, although some do not, and it could lead to all sorts of bad spamming. And it's really bad PR, mostly for the site, and can be quite dangerous because it, again, can steal cookies and things like that. All right, so this is unencrypted communication, or the eavesdropping hack. So this right here is the reason why you should never ever join public Wi-Fi without a VPN. So unencrypted communication hacks are performed by being a man in the middle on shared Wi-Fi. They're also known as MITM attacks for short, right? They work if sites use HTTP instead of HTTPS, which is the safer transport layer security protocol. Although there are such things as SSL strippers, and there are actually ways around this, which is again why you really need a VPN on public Wi-Fi. So what VPNs do is they tunnel and encrypt your traffic, which basically renders this whole hack impossible. Which is why if you ever join public Wi-Fi, bad idea in the first place, but for whatever reason, if you do, you must have a VPN to prevent this, right? So in this case, let's say I'm a hacker, I'm on free public Wi-Fi, whatever, and I have a network sniffer monitoring all the traffic on the network, right? And let's say a person logs onto an insecure site, or I make it insecure by using an SSL stripper, something like that. So normally the hacker cannot steal the passwords using a sniffer, but on an HTTP instead of HTTPS site, they can, right? So all these stolen passwords or private account info is now tunneled directly to the hacker, which is not great, especially if you're logging into your bank account or logging into something important, or let's say you're just logging into social media, but you reuse that password for your bank accounts. That's really, really dangerous, right? So they can steal your account info and steal a bunch of money, and it's really, really not a good situation. So the good news is that most sites do use HTTPS and retain their certificates. So most sites have this vulnerability patched, although individual users, they really, really need to take responsibility by using VPNs on public Wi-Fi. All right, so this is the user enumeration, or the error message hack. So user enumeration hacks are performed by brute forcing accounts based on error messages. They work if a site uses specific instead of generic error messages for failed logins. So for example, let's say I'm a hacker, or better yet, I make a bot, right? And I decide to brute force a login page. This usually takes a long time because of the many possibilities. But see, if a site says unknown user or password incorrect, it makes it a lot easier, right? So users are more vulnerable to things like word lists. So word lists are brute forcing mechanisms which guess passwords based on commonly used words in passwords. The good news is that a reCAPTCHA can help prevent against hackers brute forcing bots, or you can use some sort of cooldown method. I mean, most sites do not have this vulnerability patch for user convenience because they want to know, right? However, it is an uncommon attack due to the brute force nature. Most hackers don't like brute forcing because it takes a long time. It requires a lot of computational power. So this is a pretty rare attack, but a lot of sites still do this, and it actually is quite insecure. I mean, not the end of the world, but not great either. All right, so the information leakage attack, or this is called the research attack, right? So information leakage attacks are performed by getting information about a server to find specific exploits. They work if a site reveals too much information about their server or file structure to the user. So now let's say I inspect Element, right, and I get this response header. So all the server information is publicly shared. In this case, it's an Apache, right? Or better yet, the file extension is visible, or the error messages give way too much info to the user, right? So, or better yet, I ping an IP address and the pings are not hidden, and then all of a sudden I get exactly what server they're on, and then I can go to sites such as like ExploitDB, or certain things on softwares like Kali. They have automatic things that specifically target servers, and there's well-known exploits of these servers. So it makes it actually a relatively common attack. So most sites are careful not to leak too much information, although if they do, it can be quite dangerous because they make server-specific attacks, such as this Apache, right? I can Google it on what they're exploitable to, and then as a hacker, I can gain a lot of access based on this. So if you're a site owner, you need to be really, really careful not to leak too much information about what server you're on, otherwise you make hackers' lives very easy. All right, so password mismanagement, or the guessing hack. So password mismanagement hacks are performed by brute forcing easy to guess or unsafely stored passwords. They work if a site does not have restrictions on passwords and if they're not hashed. So, for example, this is the reason that a lot of sites make you have one uppercase character and one number. So this is the criteria for passwords, right? They also lock out your account after multiple attempts. So yes, I mean, it is really annoying to the user. I mean, I'll admit, I hate when sites do this, but I mean, stuff like this is a gift to a hacker. And password 123, QWERTY, beautiful. I can just guess all this stuff, right? And another thing sites need to do is always hash their passwords if they store them. They should never ever be stored in plain text. Otherwise, hackers can just word list something and get a lot of users' data, because the reality is that a lot of users pick passwords such as this, and they're not very secure, which is why it's really, really important to use these criteria, and really, if the criteria doesn't exist, to always use that in your account, even if they don't require you to. Another thing is, I know it's really annoying to try not to use the same password across many sites. This actually happened to me quite a few years ago. I used the same password for a bunch of sites, and one site was hacked, and then all of a sudden I got emails saying that there's a security breach because all the sites that I had were hacked. All my accounts were hacked because I used the same password. So it's really, really important not to use the same password. An easy way to get around this is by adding like a plus the name of the site. So you can do some sort of generic password plus Facebook or plus Instagram, let's say, if you're on social media. So you can do that to just differentiate the sites, but not make it too easy for the hackers to get in. So you can also salt the hash passwords if you're a site owner as well for extra security from things like rainbow tables. So what rainbow tables do is they unhash this, basically they reverse it to turn a hashed password into plain text. Although if you salt it, it pretty much makes it impossible. So yeah, so the good news is that most sites store passwords securely and have some sort of creation criteria like this. So it is difficult for hackers to do that, although not all sites do, and if they don't, it can be quite dangerous for the user. All right, so this is the privilege escalation. This is the editing hack, right? So privilege escalation hacks are performed by editing variables in a site by inspecting element or by using some sort of cookie editor, both easy to do on something such as Chrome, right? They work if a site has insecure cookies or if there's sensitive information written in the HTML. So let's say in this example, a hacker inspects your site and sees unencrypted session IDs and cookies, right? This is short, this is not great, this is not encrypted, so let's see, I'm gonna edit the cookie. Now, great, I got lucky, I now have control of another user's account that uses ID number 1, right? Not great. Another example is a hacker inspects the site and sees some sort of hidden variable, right? Ooh, look, value admin or value user, right? So now, great, if I just change this to admin in Chrome, inspect elements, super easy, now I have admin privileges. Really not good. So luckily this is a common attack and most sites are patched to this vulnerability, so that is a good thing. All right, so session fixation or the cookie hack. So session fixation hacks are performed by crafting a malicious URL and directing a user to sign in with it. They work if a site has session IDs in their URL, and also again because of social engineering, creating some sort of bait, right? All right, so let's say I'm gonna create a badge URL. So in this case, I'm gonna put some code in here, right? And then I send an email to someone, it's tempting bait for a user to visit. And if open, again, the user's cookies can be hijacked. And in this case, the user logs in, the credentials are verified with the bad session ID, and the hacker visits the site, and they're now logged into the user's account, which is really not good. Good news, it's an easy attack, so most sites are patched to this vulnerability. Yeah. All right. So weak session IDs, or the command line hack. Weak session ID hacks are performed by brute forcing session IDs and seeing which ones work. They work if session IDs are short and not encrypted. This is a common attack and most safe session IDs are a must nowadays, so the good news is that most sites are patched to this vulnerability, but let's see how it works. All right, so this is a pretty short session ID, right? So the hacker makes a brute force script to guess session IDs. Beautiful. User 81293 is unlucky. So the only thing the hacker needs to do is put in this number into the session ID parameter, either by using inspect element or something, and yay, this user session has now been hijacked. This is really not a good situation. Like I said, most sites are patched, but if they're not, this can be quite dangerous. All right, so XML bombs, or the expansion hack. So XML bombs are performed by editing an XML's file inline DTD to keep expanding and crash the server, right? It crashes at around 3 gigabytes. They work if a site accepts XML uploads or if a parser still uses inline DTDs. This is a uncommon attack, so quite a few sites are vulnerable to this hack, right? All right, so here's a useful application of DTDs, or DTDs stand for document type definitions, right? So this is the expanded version, okay? So in this case, basically they add this thing employee and they make the company this, okay? But now let's say I'm a hacker. The only thing I need to do is kind of an inspect element type thing for XML, right? XML is kind of like an HTML-like tag-based programming language. All right, so instead of doing this, I'm going to exploit this feature, right? So basically I just keep connecting this to the thing before and it keeps expanding forever and ever and ever, and it basically crashes the server. And this is actually a form of like a DOS attack, and this is an uncommon attack actually. So quite a few sites are vulnerable to this hack. Although many sites do not use DTDs anymore, unfortunately they are enabled by default. And if you own a site, you need to be really, really careful to disable it. Otherwise, you're vulnerable to this. All right, so XML external entities, right? So XML external entity hacks are performed by crafting a malicious URL to get sensitive server data files. And they work if inline DTDs are enabled and if redirects are not sanitized. This is an uncommon attack, so quite a few sites are vulnerable to this hack. All right, so many sites use external sign-ins, and this requires redirect links. A hacker takes advantage of this and creates a malicious file, let's say. This file is then hosted, and a bad link can be made. And because of the broken XML, an error occurs, but the sensitive file is downloaded per the hack, and now the hacker has all the server passcodes, etc. Not good. All right. So let's start with here, denial of service attacks. This is super, super, super common. I'm calling it the hack because it's so common. All right. Denial of service attacks are performed by sending a massive amount of packets to a server and rendering people unable to connect, right? They work if there's no DOS or DDoS protection on a site, right? So in this case, a hacker pings a site relentlessly, and the site gets so many pings that it just crashes. So this is the crash site, right? Another form of a DDoS attack is a slow loris attack, which almost reaches the crashing point, but just slows down the server and makes it super, super, super annoying to any user who's trying to do the site, right? So this is a very common attack. However, it's extremely difficult to prevent against this attack because of how it's set up. So unfortunately, many sites are vulnerable, especially if they don't have DDoS protection enabled, right? Stuff like that. And it's pretty much impossible to protect against. So this is why this is a very common attack. You hear about it a lot on the news. There's these hacker organizations who shut down sites this way, right? I mean, it's not a hard attack, but a lot of times this DDoS, right? It's done on a botnet, so it's done by many different locations, so it's impossible to ping whoever's doing it. It's impossible to just block that IP address off. And it's really, really not a good situation for whoever owns the site because your site is pretty much down. All right. Okay, so this is actually the last one for this part of this episode. As I said, there are a lot of web-based attack vectors, so that is the end of this part. All right. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.